We're in the Gospel of Luke, 11th chapter, and verses 37 through 54, although I don't know that we'll get all through 54 verses. But that is one whole segment that we want to look at, because in this segment, Jesus denounces the Pharisees and the lawyers. So let's read at least a portion of that and then go back and look at it. It says, and he spake, as he spake, a certain Pharisee besought him to dine with him. And he went in and sat down to meat. And when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. And the Lord said unto him, now do ye Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward parts is full of ravening and wickedness. Ye fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also? But rather give alms of such things as ye have, and behold, all things are clean unto you. But woe unto you, Pharisees, for ye tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass over judgment and the love of God. These ought ye have done, and not to leave the other undone. Woe unto you, Pharisees, for you love the upper seats in the synagogues and greetings in the markets. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are the grapes which appear not, and the men that walk over them are not aware of them. Let's stop there and look at those verses. It says, now when he had spoken, or as the King James, as he spake, it connects this passage here with the preceding passages, 39 or 29 through 36. After Jesus had finished speaking, a Pharisee asked Jesus to have lunch with him. The meal with someone in Israel, when someone invited you over, it was a sign of friendship. So in Israel, that's what it meant. But this invitation was a little bit surprising, that this Pharisee would ask Jesus to come to his house for a meal. Jesus had just rebuked the nation, and by implication, the leaders of that nation. The Pharisees always refused to have a meal with non-Pharisees. I mean, they just didn't have anything to do with it as far as sitting down and eating with it. He could have breached what would have been a Pharisaical separation rules that they have out of curiosity. I mean, he could have just said, well, I'm going to break this rule out of curiosity because I want to see what Jesus has to say. There was really no indication here that there was any ulterior motive for him asking Jesus over. No indication of that, that he had any evil motives in inviting Jesus. So maybe it was just because he wanted to, was curious about some things. But Jesus accepted the invitation. And Jesus went in and he reclined at the table. Now, as we said before, we go back over this, the Pharisees were one of four groups of people at that time, Jewish sects, we may say, that time. You had the Sadducees, and the Sadducees were the wealthy elite priests of that day. You had the Zealots. The Zealots were your political revolutionaries. They saw independence from Rome. You had your Essenes, which is an aesthetic monastics or monastery type of people. They just basically separated themselves from everybody else, just like, you see your monasteries, your ones that go in there, they kind of just separate themselves from the world. And then the word Essenes comes from a Hebrew verb that means to separate. So that's probably where they got the name from. The Pharisees, though, viewed themselves as a separate from and superior to everyone because of their unmatched zeal that they had for the Mosaic law and their traditions. So, as far as they were concerned, they were separate and they were superior to all those because they just had an unmatched zeal for the Mosaic law and for the rabbinic traditions. The Pharisees originated during that intertestamental period, that period of time when about 400 years there, where God was silent and didn't really speak through the prophets. They originated during that intertestamental period, and they're likely an offshoot of Hasidim. These Hasidim were the pious ones. It means the pious ones. They were the ones who opposed the Hellenizing of the Jewish culture under a wicked king, a wicked Seleucid king by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was that Seleucid king. And so this Hasidim, they were the pious ones, and they didn't want any type of Hellenizing of the Jews or the Jewish culture during that time. The Pharisees were basically laymen. They weren't like your Sadducees, the wealthy elite priests. The Pharisees were basically laymen, generally from the middle class. Although they were few in number, there was about 6,000 at the time of Herod the Great, when Herod was there. They were few in number, about 6,000 during that time, but they had a lot of favor with the people. The people, they gave, because they had a lot of favor with the people, it gave them significant influence with the Sanhedrin, or Sanhedrin, whatever how you want to pronounce it. And you can find that in Acts 5, 34 through 40. The Lord's confrontation, when he comes up and he confronts the Pharisees and he confronts these, it reveals two defining characteristics of false religionists, those who have false religion. It reveals, number one, what they love, and number two, what they lack. So two things, when you talk about false religion and false religions, Jesus' confrontation here shows two things that false religionists, two characteristics of them. The things of what they love and what they lack. Let's first of all look at what they love, because we just read that verses 38 through 44 give us an idea. The Pharisees' religion was marked by 5 features that they loved, according to MacArthur. He says they loved the symbolic, they loved the sinful, they loved the simplistic, they loved the secondary, and they loved the showy. So you have the symbolic, the sinful, the simplistic, the secondary, and the showy. 5 features that they loved. Verse 38, we could go back there, it says, and when the Pharisee saw it, he marveled that he had not first washed before dinner. So when Jesus goes in, he doesn't do the normal, customary, ritualistic, Pharisaical ritual of washing his hands and all. He doesn't go through that ceremony. He just goes in, and so the Pharisee notices that, and he sees it, and he's actually taken back, marveled. It says he marveled. He was actually probably taken back and maybe a little insulted. Jesus didn't first do that ceremonial washing of hands before the meal. It had nothing to do with hygiene, okay? This had nothing to do with hygiene. He was not shocked because the Lord's hands weren't physically clean. He wasn't shocked because of that. He was shocked, rather, because he had not followed that elaborate ritual washing to make them ceremonially clean. It really didn't have anything to do with he wasn't shocked because his hands weren't clean. He just didn't do that ritual ceremonial cleaning that they go through to do that. That's what he was shocked by, that Jesus hadn't followed that. That was not required in the Old Testament, but had developed as a part of the extra biblical traditions of the elders. And if you go back to Matthew 15:2 or Mark 7:3, references there, it was part of that extra biblical traditions that the elders would later and be collected into that Mishnah, into the teachings and training of the Mishnah, which was about 3rd century. So it wasn't something that you go back in the Old Testament and see that was required, but something that developed as a part of that extra biblical tradition that the elders decided and became part of the Mishnah now, of the Jewish Mishnah. It symbolized holiness and a desire to be clean from all the defilement of the world. That's what it symbolized. But it was really rather an empty act of symbolism that could not address the corruption of the heart. They were good about the outward, and that's why Jesus, when he knowing that he felt what he felt and was thinking, he addressed it, and he told them, he says, you make the outside clean, but you don't do anything about the inside. And so this is what Jesus is telling them. This symbolized, that washing was a symbol for them. That's one of the things, false religions have, that symbol. This symbolizes holiness. This symbolizes the desire to be clean, but it does nothing about the inward person and the inward heart. So it was really an empty act of symbolism that did not address the corruption that was in the heart. And that's what Jesus is addressing. The Pharisee was amazed, we said, that Jesus ignored the tradition. And he was probably a little bit insulted by the fact that Jesus didn't observe that tradition being in his home. But Jesus refused to affirm those man-made regulations which violated the commandments of God. Jesus was not going to affirm them. These are man-made. They violate actually the commandments of God. Matthew 15, 3-6 is referenced. So the first thing that they love is those symbols. Okay, so false religionists, they like that symbol. And the Pharisees like the symbols. This is a symbol of that. Verse 39, the second thing is that they had a love for the sinful. The Lord said unto him, now do you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. Jesus knew his mind. He understood. He was troubled by the fact that Jesus had ignored the ritual washing. Jesus confronted this man particularly, superficially, and said, or his superficiality, he confronted that, and he said to him, you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and the platter, but inside you are full of ravening or robbery and wickedness. Okay? Full of robbery and wickedness. The point is that despite their outward devotion to their ritual and their ceremony and their tradition, on the inside they were full of robbery and wickedness. And that's what Jesus confronts them with. They were full of sin. Their souls fed on pride and lust and deception. There are two terms that Jesus used here to describe that inner corruption. The first term is harparges, which is the Greek for robbery. It means to plunder, or to pillage, or booty. So pillage, plunder, robbery, it refers to something that is received by a violent force. They get it by a violent force. In classical Greek, it referred oftentimes to rape. So something that was taken by force. So the first word he uses there to describe them is that robbery, harpages, robbery, possessions and their eternal souls. You get into false religion, and you basically, it ravages you. It plunders you. It takes your temporal possessions, but worse, it takes your eternal soul. It leads you down the wrong path. The other word that Jesus used is the word wickedness, porneia. It's evil. It means depravity or malice or badness. And it aptly applies to these Pharisees that he's talking to. They were, every one of those, evil, depraved, they had malice, badness. They didn't think so. For them, they observed the law. They were meticulous about that ceremonially, and they looked at all the things that they did, and they thought they were clean. And it's be a horrible thing to think that you're right, and you're righteous, and you're clean, and to hear Jesus say, no, you're dirty, you're filthy, you're not clean at all. You're clean on the outside, but your heart's rotten. But they thought they were good. But these words that Jesus calls them, he says, you're these two things, the corruption that's in you. You're this robbery and this wickedness. He says, that's who you are. The external religion of the Pharisees was a sham. It exalted symbols on the outside and cherished sin on the inside. And so false religion does that. It can exalt the symbols on the outside and then cherish sin on the inside. Preoccupation with their external rituals that they did caused them to overlook the significant issue of their wicked heart. So concerned about, the rituals and Moses, all the rules and regulations that were there and all the traditions. So concerned about that they overlooked the fact that their hearts weren't right with God. That can even happen today. We can be so concerned about other things and so concerned about rituals and even symbols and ceremonies that we neglect the real matter, which is the heart. I think we do. Sometimes we do a lot of that with study of Revelations. We get so tied up in what this symbol means and this means and this number is and what that number is, and we all think we're right. I mean, okay, if you're post-millennial, they think they're right. If you're pre-millennial, they think they're right. If you're on-millennial, we think we're right. If you're pre-trib or post-trib, everybody thinks they're right. And we get so tied up in what this means and what that means, and sometimes we can just, and a lot of times we judge other people by that, and it's not good. We forget about the heart. What really matters is the heart. I can't explain all the Revelations, and I don't know anybody else that can either. There are portions of it I understand, and there's portions I don't understand. And I'm just going to have to leave it up to the Lord to show me when we get to heaven. So, I don't know about you, but I like to be a pan-millennialist, right? It'll all pan out. It'll all pan out at the time. So, in the end, we know who's going to win. Well, the other thing that they loved, the Pharisees loved, was that they had the love of the simplistic. The simplistic. And Jesus says in verses 41 and 40 and 41, he says, "Ye fools, did not he that made that which is without make that which is within also? But rather give alms of such things as you have, and behold, all things are clean unto you." So Jesus really addressed them as foolish ones, ye fools or you foolish ones. It's an unconventional address to them, but certainly deserving. You don't usually address someone as ye fools. So it's kind of an unconventional address. But they were very deserving of that address that Jesus used. Aphronies is the word for foolish ones in the Greek. Those who are, it refers to those who are ignorant, They lack common sense. They think in a very shallow way, superficially, no depth. So when he says foolish ones, he's saying, you're ignorant about some things. You lack common sense here. You think very shallow about things, very superficial. Christ's rhetorical question when he says, did not he who made the outside make the inside also, was an unmistakable rebuke to them. He was rebuking them at that time and rebuking this guy. He was letting them know that, can you imagine? You're so foolish, don't you realize that he that made the outside made the inside also? To think that God is only concerned about the external rituals and not about the hearts was the height of their folly. Here they are, it's like, well, all God cares about is the external, And Jesus is saying, how foolish can you be? The person, he who made the outside also made the inside. So to think that God's just concerned about how you look on the outside and not the inside is a height of folly. And that's what Jesus says to him. And then he says, but give that which is within as charity, and then all things are clean for you. That's best understood, the passage, as an exhortation to his hearers to demonstrate their hearts before God by giving to the poor. All their external trappings, their almsgiving, their prayers, their fastings were hypocritical as long as they kept on plundering and pillaging and ravaging the people both physically and spiritually. All the things, everything else they did, as long as they were still pillaging and ravaging the people, both physically and spiritually, it meant nothing. All their almsgiving, everything else meant nothing. It kept them from focusing on what was in the heart. The other thing that we see about the Pharisees and those false religionists is that they love the secondary. The secondary, verse 42. But woe unto you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass over judgment and the love of God. These you ought to have done and not to leave the other undone. There's some people that will say, well, when they don't like to tithe, so they'll argue that tithing was Old Testament, it wasn't New Testament. Well, right there, Jesus tells them, he says you tithe, your mint, your rue, all manner of herbs, but you pass over the judgment of God. These you ought to have done, and what did he say? And not leave the other undone. So tithing's taught not only there, but in other places, but some that don't want to tithe, or say it's an Old Testament thing, they don't want to subject themselves to that, they'll try to say, well, the New Testament doesn't teach that. Yes, it does. But their love for the secondary, Jesus said, woe. Now that woe, the word woe, is not a declaration of sorrow, okay? It is a declaration of judgment. So when he said woe, he wasn't, well, that's, sorry. Woe is a judgment. He's passing judgment there. They were devoted to the things of secondary importance. He says, you tithe, you mint, of your mint or your rue and every kind of garden herb, but you fail to do the matters that really should have been done first, which is to love God and to do justice. That's the first thing you should be doing. Love God and do justice, and then these other things you should also do. But they are secondary in importance to loving God and doing justice. So he says you ought to have done this. To love God, do justice first. Don't leave the other things undone. They were devoted to secondary things of importance for them, but they weren't dedicated to the most important thing. They saw to it that they tithed of their mint and their rue and their other garden herbs, But those were all secondary. They didn't do very good at loving God and doing justly with people. And so Jesus says, again, he rebukes them and says, woe unto you, judgment upon you, because you love secondary things. And again, that can apply to today as well. People that love secondary things, they just fell into love God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Many say they love God with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength, but they prove by example that they love secondary things more than they love God. And then the last thing he said was the love of the showy. Now, false religionists love the showy. And this is verses 43 through 44. It says, woe unto you, Pharisees, for you love the uppermost seats in the synagogues and greetings in the markets. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are as graves which appear not, and the men that walk over them are not aware of them. That's quite a rebuke. He said to them, woe unto them, because he says, and that's the other second woe there, woe unto them, or actually the third woe, as part of that. He says, they love the chief seats. You know, these chief seats are the ones that the dignitaries sit in, that are in front, facing the people. You know, kind of like up here. These are a lot of these seats up here, because they're the ones that are facing the people. You know, congregation. He says, you love those showy seats. You love that in the synagogues and in the marketplaces that you go to. You want to be in those seats. You want the status, you know, that goes with it. You're looking for that status. You love those showy things. But he says, despite their outward show of holiness, Jesus likened them to concealed tombs. He says, whom people walk over and they're unaware that they're even walking over it. He says, you're like a concealed tomb. Now, if you remember in the Old Testament forbade anyone from touching a dead body. It forbade even the walking over a grave. Numbers, the 19th chapter, verses 11 through 22, you can read there. Verse 16 speaks about even a grave, touching of a grave. And those who did so were considered ceremonially unclean. Okay, they were unclean if you touched anything, a corpse or grave. You were considered ceremonially unclean, and there's a process you had to go through to be clean. Therefore, the graves in Israel were clearly marked, so the people would know. So the people would know we cannot not to inadvertently touch them or defile themselves. So Jesus is saying, having led the people astray, these Pharisees were like unmarked graves. They were there, and people, and they're defiling the souls of those who come in contact with it. So that's quite an indictment that Jesus has made against them, to tell them you're like an unmarked grave, and people who come in contact with you are being defiled. That's what false religionists do. That is as far as I got yesterday in my study. So I'm going to let you go early. Verses 45 through 40 or through 54, we'll finish that up next week, the Lord willing. Okay. And